Oh, SHIT. Anyone else love that Motion Raceworks commercial? Morning, everybody. Welcome back to P&W Car Mods YouTube channel. How's that for some professional intro crap? So as some of you may have saw the other day, I managed to break the Corvette unintentionally, doing something stupid. This didn't need to break, a quick early death. We were out troubleshooting and testing some wheel hop scenarios again, and the car wheel hopped again really violently, and even though I only let it happen for a few seconds, maybe less, probably a second, it broke that off. This is not an uncommon failure on C5 Corvettes, especially with a supercharger, with the additional load of a supercharger on the belt. So this would be the factory idler that would go right there, alternator up here, power steering pump right there, and that just decided to come off of there. GM revised this part. I've got a new one coming. It's the new part number. Basically, this is designed similarly, except for they cast this in with a almost like it's boxed. It's still hollow inside, but this is solid right here, if that makes sense. It's supposed to be a good bit stronger, even though I've heard a few people have still managed to break those. So that new part should be here soon, maybe even today. Pardon my tool salad. So one of the other things that we're going to do while the car's taken apart this far is I'm making the switch to an 8-rib belt drive for the supercharger. And with Corvette accessory spacing, it's a little bit trickier. You're limited in your options. But as you can see, the blower pulley comes from Olson Custom Works, ready to accept 8-rib belt. So we just have to convert everything else to 8-rib, and we can then run the bigger belt. Here's the little power steering pump. I ended up just shattering the plastic stock pulley off of it, and we'll be going to a dirty Dingo 8-rib pulley that is properly spaced. So I still need to pull this hub off from the old plastic pulley. One of the things that I wanted to show on this video was, okay, let me start by saying that the whole concept behind this project was to try and do the LSA on a budget and always stay well ahead of what it would have happened if I would have bought the best quality like A&A kit or ECS Superchargers kit. And even where I'm at now, I'm still, I think, cheaper than going down that road. In the spirit of budget, I went ahead and blindly ordered one of these Summit C2501. Yeah, Summit C2501. I think they've been blindly marketing this balancer as 8-rib capable for supercharger applications. And the reality of it is that it just isn't. So let's take a look at it. I got to send this back, so I got to be kind of careful with it. It's not tear it up. So I learned this the hard way and had a good discussion the other day with one of their customer service reps. It was very understanding of my complaints. But this is a very nice piece. These are super commonly sold for a stock replacement, high quality, SFI approved. At least I believe it is SFI approved, even though I don't see a sticker anywhere. As far as I know, it is. There it is right there. Pardon the dog hair. Better get that out of there before I send this back. Anyways, the C2501 is the direct competitor to the Powerbond SFI balancer. This is the one that I was running on there. But this is cut for 8 ribs. As you can see, 8 rib belt spacing. Here's where the engineers screwed up. For whatever reason, they decided to make this balancer. Let's see if I can point this directly at the camera. When they added the 2 extra grooves for the 8 rib belt, they added it towards the engine. And hopefully you can see that. If you're going to have an 8 rib belt drive on Corvette spacing, the 2 extra grooves need to be added out here. Cannot be added here. You can't move the belt closer to the engine. It just won't work. As an example, if you look at your alternator pulley, the last groove is up against the case. There is no adding 2 more grooves closer to the alternator. I've got a, let's see if I can pick this up without dropping it. Oh! I also have a dirty Dingo alternator pulley 8 rib coming in the mail. So here's my example. It's physically impossible to add 2 more grooves that way. They have to be added out front. So after talking to the Summit rep, I'm hoping that they will get that corrected. And in the questions section of the web page for this part on Summit's website, there's got to be a half a dozen answers from a Summit representative saying that this can be used for 8 rib supercharger applications, and it just can't. So don't make the same mistake I did. I'm bummed out. They had a golden opportunity to market this balancer to budget supercharger guys, and they just missed it by a little bit. So like I said, they're at least going to take this back, no problems. And I ended up ordering a Innovators West 10% Overdrive balancer, which should be here tomorrow. And unfortunately, that kind of kills a little bit of the spirit of the budget aspect. I think I could have done an 8 rib swap if this balancer would have worked out for less than 500 bucks. Now, since I've had to go with the Innovators West, since I've had to go with the Innovators West, that's added 300 bucks to the project on top of. So this is a $200 balancer. Innovators West is a $530 balancer. So anyways, I'm rambling, which I'm good at. I'll start filming some more of this stuff as the parts roll in, and take you guys along on the journey of converting this to 8 rib, and all the way to the point of getting a belt on it. I'll be running the green Gates HD series belts, and of course we'll have to start over with a brand new length because there's a bunch of different size differences of diameters. I'm going to be making the switch to these Gates idlers. So this is going to be the LSA idler, and then I'll be putting one of these same idlers at this position right here. These are nice because they're double bearing, so you have bearings in a wider you have a bearing in the full width of the idler. Whereas this style, you only have one not tiny, but one bearing kind of in the middle, so it's going to be less stable. But like I said, we'll fire the camera back up when we get the parts in and start putting this car back together. All right, we're working on take number 2 of putting the aftermarket power steering pump pulley on. Yesterday it was an epic fail. Ended up snapping the installer bolt. This is a replacement. The bolt couldn't take the load. So I ended up polishing the pump shaft up some more and then honing out the power steering pump pulley a little bit. Basically I got it stuck halfway on there and then that bolt failed. So taking a bunch of steps to mitigate that from happening again. So I'm gonna go get the pulley out of the oven and we're gonna keep our fingers crossed. Putting a little bit more grease, actually putting grease on this pulley, which seems counterintuitive, but that thing is so tight it is not going to slip. So we've got this heated up to about 225 degrees. Okay, I need the ratchet, but there you go. Okay, here goes nothing. You really put that on there backwards. Just fine this time. Just had to sleep on it. Needless to say, there was a lot of swearing yesterday. I didn't throw anything, but I wanted to. Now I got a new bolt for my install tool, so that's good. So this basically gets pressed on till it's flush. The dirty Dingo pulley comes with a retaining screw. I don't know how necessary that is, but we're going to put it in there. If I ever have to change this pump for any reason, I think I've pretty much decided that it's probably just going to get the shaft cut off of it to save the pulley. And yes, I did verify about 5 times to make sure that you can get any of the bolts through the pulley to put this assembly back together. It would not be enjoyable to install this pulley in the car, but you could if you had to. All right, we'll turn the camera back on when we get the rest of our pulleys in the mail today. We got our new alternator pulley. We're going to put that on next. I wish it was a little larger in diameter, but it's the only one they sell, and it's the only thing I have to work with. It is a little smaller, which I don't think it's going to hurt this alternator, but it is going to spin it faster. I'd rather spin it slower, not faster. So hopefully I can get this nut zipped off of here. If I can't hold it, we'll have to wrap a belt around it, but usually this works. That thing's a boat anchor compared to the aluminum one. The hub of that I think is just thicker too, so we don't have as much room for the nut to grab onto. It's a pretty thin washer, but man, that's close to the case.
Yeah, I was noticing that too. Almost two. You can't tell because it's so big.
Still see daylight through there. Okay, hopefully this doesn't shred the gloves.
Money.
I like it. No drag. It's not rubbing on anything. I think she'll get the job done just fine. It's going to be neat to see how all this stuff lines up. Here's the new balancer. We got that in just moments ago. Now what I want to do is I'm going to kind of route out the keyway and convert it into a slot for the 1/4" pin. And the only reason I'm doing this is because you can replace these hubs on the Innovators West balancers at your leisure. I can't replace the crank very easy, and I'm not a huge fan of turning my crank snout into Swiss cheese and just keep drilling holes in it. So I'm gonna route this out till it's close to fitting the pin, and then we're gonna go ahead and put the balancer on, and then I will still put the fixture in there. I will still put the fixture in there and just clean this up till it's nicely reamed out. And we'll put this pin back in there. So that's our next task. All right, so here is where we are at. I think this turned out very successful. Doubt you'll be able to see in there. Maybe you can. Get this camera just right. Looks like the pin might even be a little bit low, which isn't the end of the world. Just means that when I go to put this on the crank, if I get this lined up right, I may not even have to chase it with a drill bit. So basically what I ended up doing was I ended up routing the keyway slot out with a carbide burr until the hardened steel pin just nests in there 50-50. So there's a corresponding half moon in the crank snout. So I've got to do my job when I go to set this on the crank snout that everything's lined up. So I'm going to go rotate the crank around on the car so that it's straight up and down. And I'm going to put the balancer in the oven at 210 degrees for probably a half an hour. And it should go right on there. Innovators West provides you with some extreme pressure grease that you can smear inside the hub and also on the crank snout. I have I got one of the relatively inexpensive Harmonic balancer installers. I need to make sure my washers fit, but I'm pretty sure that they do. This thing's covered in dust and dust bunnies. Oh yeah, that fits right in there just fine. So we'll be using this guy to install it in the crank. And and I wasn't going to do this till tomorrow, but since this has gone so positively well, I think we're going to go ahead and get after it. Well, ladies and germs, we're ready to put the balancer on. Got the snout greased with the Innovators West super special grease. Got a little oil on the seal, and I've got the balancer in the oven set for 200 degrees. And let's see, we've got the pin groove at the top. Rotated the crank so the pin groove is at the top, so we'll mate that up when we stick the balancer up in there, so that we try and get that groove lined up with the groove in the balancer. So I'm going to go get it out of the oven. I've got all my tools staged down below, and hopefully this will go somewhat uneventfully. Alright, we're coming in hot, literally. So a lot of people kind of have a tendency to freak out over the oven thing a little bit. Oh, you're gonna melt your seal. It's like, no, think about it, guys. The oven at 210, 200 degrees, somewhere's in there. An LS engine will easily get to 200 degrees, sometimes even upwards of 240 degrees. It's not gonna melt your seal. Okay. All right. And we crank. Oh, my creeper shifted. Extra crank just to make sure. Come on, come loose, nut. Mother trucker. I have to switch over to the breaker bar. Oh boy. It must have slipped on quite a ways further than I thought it was going to. Because we only cranked about an inch of threads, maybe a little less, 3/4 of an inch. But it sure looks like it's lined up. All right. Everything about working on these cars is somewhat of a overcome adversity. So I widened the keyway out to match the slot in the crank that was already there. So far that's looking like that was a waste of time. So it's the way she goes though. So now what I think I'm going to do is I'm going to put the drill jig in there and I'm going to see what that drill's like. If it scares me, I'm going to have to take the balancer back off and come up with a plan B. If I can drill this safely, I'm going to end up making a new pin out of a piece of 1/4 inch drill rod, so that the drill rod will come out to the washer flange to retain it. If I put the pin in there the way it was originally designed, it could fall out in that dead space between the shoulder of the hub and the crank snout. But that's just my not understanding how this balancer was built, and we'll do whatever it takes to make it work. When I get this all sorted out, I'll turn the camera back on. I think I'm going to rename this car Adversity. It's going to be its new nickname, because all I have to do when I work on this car is overcome adversities. So I was able to come up with a solution for pinning the crank and not turning the crank snout into Swiss cheese. Hopefully this shows. I was able to get the guide put in place on the balancer and safely drill out the keyway slot into a round hole, mating up to the existing half a slot, if you will, that was already in the crank snout. And so the problem with that is, on the Innovators West Balancer, the hub has a dead space of an extra 1 inch, whereas a normal balancer, the hub is almost flush with the crank snout, like I think within 1/16 of an inch or so. So here's the pin that you would normally use to pin a balancer onto the crank. It's about maybe 3/4 of an inch long. Well, I ended up having to make a custom pin out of a piece of 1/4 inch drill rod that's longer, that bottoms out in the crank snout. So we're 3/4 of an inch into the crank snout, and then I had to extend it out to the flange of the hub on the Innovators West Balancer, so that when their special washer is in here, I think it clearly makes sense that I had to make this longer, so that the short pin, if I would have jammed it up in there, could fall out in this dead space in here. Well, now that I made a custom one that's another inch longer, when this is torqued up, that pin cannot back out of there. So hopefully that makes sense. The next thing that we noticed that's going to have to be dealt with is with the Overdrive balancer. There's only about 1/16 of an inch, maybe 3/32 in between the pulley part of the balancer and the cradle. So that means I would literally have to jack the motor up to put a belt in this thing, and I'm not really okay with that. So I think what I'm going to do is jack the motor up a little bit tomorrow and take my Dremel to that cradle and put just enough of a trough in the aluminum casting to be able to slip a belt through there when it's put together. That way, if a belt ever fails out on the road, you could change it if need be without going to extreme measures. But anyways, that's it for today. It's just about dinner time, and we'll finish getting this put together tomorrow, and I'll show some more steps in the reassembly of the front of the motor. So we got the balancer done. Probably not quite the best lighting. Let's get this guy down here. I put some silicone on the washer for the balancer to help seal that from any oil being able to weep out of there, and got that torqued up. I like the torque of the Innovators West bolt setup better, because they only ask for 130 foot-pounds, and that's way easier to achieve than 240 foot-pounds. So that is done. I was able kind of a combination between my Dremel carbide burr and a file. I was able to open that, or bevel the cradle a little bit, so that I can get a belt in there now without having to jack the motor up. I got the air conditioning belt put back in. Innovators West swears up and down that on this particular balancer that the AC belt configuration is the same. I'm not quite so sure about that because the tensioner, I was able to get the belt on by hand, but the tensioner is maxed out, and that won't really hurt anything. But regardless, I think the AC portion of the pulley is still slightly bigger in diameter. From what I can remember anyways. I don't remember that tensioner being bottomed out. So let's get out from underneath it here. As you can see, I got the steering rack put back in completely. Less the shaft, steering shaft. I need to keep that loose so I can get the power steering lines from the pump back in place. And the sway bars back in. That's all things that have to be done to do a steering rack. I mean, that's all things that have to be done to do a harmonic balancer on a C5 Corvette. Now keep in mind, I have an early C5, so my ABS system is in the rear of the car. That makes this, it's one bonus to having an early C5 is it's way easier to work on the steering rack and move it out of the way and stuff. So that's where we're at currently. Getting ready to put in the alternator and power steering pump bracket and the two idlers, and we'll be well on our way to getting this fully completed. I don't know if I showed this or not yet, but I got a Gates 10 rib idler or tensioner pulley. I was able to find by part number. Now I will likely only be using the rear 8 ribs of that tensioner, but that's fine. I was unable to find an 8 rib tensioner pulley without buying a super expensive like Innovators West. That's like $100 pulley from Innovators West just for the tensioner, whereas this Gates 10 rib is $30, and it's a double bearing. So here's our new main bracket. I showed a little bit of this the other day, but I don't know if I showed this portion right here where this is walled off now to help this idler box be stronger overall. It is still hollow, but boxed in. You gotta be real careful with these bolts and make sure that you're putting them in the right place. It's very easy to break a cylinder head if you put a bolt in that's too long for its position. Okay, I think now we are going to put on our idler for the blower idler. Click. Click. Well, the pile on the bench is getting smaller, so that's a positive thing. I think we're ready to drop the alternator into place. I got the power steering pump bolted back to the main bracket, and the lines are put in place and torqued into the rack, and that all went pretty good. Steering shaft is hooked back up from the column. So yeah, I think we're going to go ahead and, like I said, we're going to drop the alternator back into the bracket, and then we're ready to lace our old belt through the pulleys and see how much it's going to come up short, so that we can get an idea on what to order for our new 8-rib belt. So let's go ahead and put the alternator back in place, like I said, and we're just about done with all the hard stuff on this job. See if I can just fling you guys all over the place. Let's see, I had to pick this clump of stuff up out of the way. Okay, so these alternator brackets, they have a floating bushing, and I think what's going on is my power steering pump power steering reservoir bracket has pushed that bushing back. And I gotta say, one thing that, as a hobby YouTuber, if you will, because that's all it is a hobby, nothing frustrates me more than the whole radio thing. I would probably film 2 or 3 times as many jobs that I do if I could turn the damn radio on. If you clang stuff off of that power steering pulley, it rings for like 10 minutes. Hopefully I don't get a copyright strike for a ringing pulley. Okay, it's belt time. I don't know if I'm going to show that part because there's really not a whole lot to see. But I will show you guys how much of a difference there is in having the overdrive pulley and the bigger idlers and bigger tensioner. So let me get that laced up and we'll see what it looks like. It looks like Project Beefy Belt is a success. Just got the belt in fresh off the old Amazon truck. Here's the, that's the size that I ended up going with for my particular pulley combination. It's 101.5 inches in length. So yeah, I ended up having to order it on Amazon because apparently the belts that are in stock at the parts stores are all afflicted with the current day, what do you call it, supply chain issue pricing. And Amazon, I think, has a bunch of these belts in warehouses that are the old school pricing, aka pre-2021-ish. And so anyways, I picked this belt up for like $40, and I think the same belt at like O'Reilly's or AutoZone was like upwards of $90, $90. So we got her wrapped around all the pulleys. Everything looks good. You can see this belt is quite a bit more substantial than the 6 rib that was on there. And we're maybe a little bit more, I'm guessing once this belt stretches out a little bit, we're going to be at mid-travel on the tensioner, which I'm fine with an 8 rib belt. When I had the 6 rib belt on there, I had the tensioner maxed out in tension. It was very difficult to get the belt on. So I think I'm ready to put the power steering reservoir back on and fill it full of fluid, throttle body, intake tube, hook up the alternator battery cable, and we're ready for a fire off. So let me get this stuff put back together and then we'll do that. Power steering reservoir is filled back up. Everything's hooked up. We're ready to start this thing. Check the belt tensioner and bleed the power steering. When you're ready, go ahead and start it. Hopefully all the warning bells and whistles and Christmas tree lights are gone off the dashboard. I am ready. Okay, go ahead. I gotta suck some power steering fluid back out of it. Actually overfilled it a little bit. I thought there would be a lot more air in the system than there was. See how much bigger that belt is? Well, I showed it to you when you was inside. Tensioner's working good. We're thinking that we should get about upwards of full 2 psi more boost with the Overdrive balancer, and little to no belt slip at all with the 8 rib setup. We didn't have a huge problem with belt slip even with the 6 rib belt. When you would stab the throttle, sometimes you could hear the belt kind of squeal for a half second or so, but then it never seemed to like lose boost once it got past that squeal. Now I don't think it'll squeal at all. But we'll test that out here.
When it doesn't rain.
Yeah. This is what it looks like in Washington right now. The usual. It's been the coldest April in the history of Aprils. Not enjoyable weather. So I'm calling this a success for now. I'll try and put like a bunch of the part numbers and the parts used to do this 8 rib conversion. This wasn't a kit. It's basically all parts that I just gathered together. And even having to buy the more expensive balancer, I think it was still about $300 to $350 cheaper than buying a kit. And the only kit that I'm aware of is a full kit from Innovators West. And don't get me wrong, they make nice stuff, but I wanted to try and piece it together with a lot more factory-oriented parts and keep it within the spirit of doing a budget build with the LSA. So we're still kind of on that, but anyways, like I said, we'll go out and drive this thing and see what happens. If you have any questions, you know where to put them, and we'll see you on the next one.